The first thing I heard was a hard knock on my front door. It was early Saturday morning, and I was standing in my kitchen when I heard someone outside shouting my name. I opened the door and saw 2 police officers standing on my driveway. Behind them was the HOA board member, Karen, pointing directly at my house. She looked confident, almost smug. Then she said, "That's him. He's violating HOA rules and refusing to cooperate." I looked at the officers and calmly asked, "What exactly am I being accused of?" One officer pulled out a clipboard and said they had received a complaint about unauthorized construction, property violations, and an alleged disturbance. I almost laughed, because there was one small problem. I wasn't in their HOA. My property was next to the subdivision, but it had never been part of the HOA. I had purchased the house and surrounding land years before the neighborhood was even developed. Karen knew that. In fact, I had told her several times. But apparently, she had decided that if she couldn't control my property through HOA rules, she could scare me into submission by calling the police. She pointed toward my backyard. That structure violates our community's standards. The officer looked at me. "What structure?" I pointed toward an old storage shed. "That." Karen immediately said, "Yes." The officer walked over and examined it. Then he came back. "Sir, this appears to be on your property." "It is," I said. Karen interrupted, "But it affects our neighborhood." The officer looked at her. "That's not the same thing as being illegal." Her expression changed. She wasn't expecting that answer. Then she pulled out a thick folder. "I have documentation proving he is subject to our rules." I knew exactly what she was holding. A copy of an old neighborhood map. The problem was that map wasn't a legal property document. So I went inside and brought out my own folder. Inside were the original property deed, survey records, county tax documents, and the recorded subdivision plat. I handed them to the officer. He looked through everything carefully. Then he asked Karen one question. "Do you have anything showing this property is legally part of the HOA?" Karen froze. "I have the neighborhood map." "That isn't what I asked." She started flipping through her folder. "Nothing." The second officer looked at me. "So this HOA has no authority over your property?" "Correct." He nodded. Then he turned back toward Karen. "Then why did you call us here?" Karen suddenly became defensive. "Because he refuses to follow the neighborhood rules." The officer sighed. "Ma'am, he doesn't live under those rules." And that's when everything changed. Because the officers weren't there to enforce an HOA's demands. They were there because Karen had made a complaint. And now they were seeing the real situation. One officer asked me whether I wanted to file a complaint about repeated harassment. I looked at Karen. She was no longer smiling. I said, "Not today," but I added one thing. I would like the incident documented. The officer nodded. They wrote everything down. Before leaving, one officer told Karen something I'll never forget. "If you have a property dispute, take it through the proper legal process. Don't use emergency services to enforce private HOA rules." Karen stood there completely silent. The officers got into their cruiser and drove away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA demanding that I attend a board meeting. They claimed I had interfered with community operations. I almost couldn't believe it. They were actually trying to punish me for refusing to obey rules that didn't apply to me. So I showed up. But this time, I didn't come alone. I brought my property records. I brought the survey. And I brought the incident report from the police visit. The boardroom went completely quiet when I placed the documents on the table. Then I asked one simple question. "Show me where my property is included in your HOA." Nobody answered. Karen stared at the table. The HOA president cleared his throat. "Well, there may have been some confusion." "Confusion?" I said. "Your board member called the police to my home." Another board member quietly admitted they had never actually verified whether my property belonged to the association. They had simply assumed it did. That assumption had cost them their credibility. And it got worse, because the county records showed something else. The HOA had been sending notices to several properties that weren't actually inside the association's legal boundaries. Karen wasn't just wrong about my property. She had apparently been wrong about several others. By the end of the meeting, the board agreed to stop sending me HOA notices. They also removed my property from their internal violation list. And the board member who had called the police? She resigned weeks later. I never had to threaten anyone. I never had to yell. I simply opened the door, showed the facts, and let the truth do the work. The biggest lesson I learned was simple. An HOA sign doesn't give an HOA authority over property it doesn't own or legally govern. And sometimes the fastest way to expose an HOA's overreach isn't to fight them. It's to calmly ask them to prove what they claim. Because when the paperwork doesn't back them up, all the confidence in the world won't save them. If you enjoyed this HOA story, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?